Why do we teach men that chasing is noble but walking away is weak? What if the truth is the exact opposite? What if real strength lies not in pursuit but in restraint? A true man doesn't chase chaos. He doesn't beg for attention. He recognizes the moment his presence is no longer appreciated and he walks away. No loud exits, no dramatic goodbyes, just quiet dignity. That's not apathy, it's clarity. It's self-respect, forged through struggle. Because a man who has done the inner work knows this. Energy is currency, and he refuses to spend it on someone who can't see his worth. This isn't a game. It's a spiritual boundary. And the man who can walk away not out of anger, but out of principle, the man who earns respect from others. Yes, but more importantly, from himself. The question isn't, how do I make her stay? The real question is, why am I still chasing someone who's okay with watching me disappear? That's where it all begins. And if you listen carefully, this realization might just change your life. Have you ever wondered why the more you chase, the faster they run? Or better yet, why are so many men today willing to betray themselves just for the hope of affection? Not love, not commitment, not respect, just hope. Hope for what? A message? A returned call? A glance that whispers, "You still matter"? There's something deeply broken at the root of that. Because when a man begins to chase, he's not just running toward a woman. He's running away from something within himself, from insecurity, from purposelessness, from the frightening truth that maybe, just maybe, he hasn't built a life worth standing still in. So he runs toward her, after her, hoping she will become the answer to a question he's too scared to ask himself. But let me be clear, no woman alive can answer the question of a man who hasn't faced himself. That might sting, and it should. Because what's at stake here isn't just your pride, it's your identity. When a man starts chasing, he puts himself in a subordinate psychological frame. He's no longer a force. He becomes a follower. He gives away his emotional power, letting someone else's attention define his worth. And that is the road to hell. So, how do we turn the path around? And what does it take to truly come back to yourself? That's exactly where we're headed next. And so, the irony is clear. The more he chases, the more he's rejected. But why? In my clinical work, I've seen this exact scenario play out thousands of times. A man loses himself while chasing a woman who doesn't value him because he has not yet learned to value himself. Then he wonders, why is she disrespecting me? Why did she ghost me? Why do I feel so small and invisible? The answer isn't out there. He feels small because he is psychologically small, not because he's inherently weak, but because he chose weakness over strength in the name of emotional survival. But the tragedy is, that very survival is silently destroying him. Now contrast that with a different kind of man. A man who doesn't chase. He doesn't walk away because he's indifferent. He walks away because he understands the price of betraying his own values. He has standards. He has direction. And most importantly, he has a spine. He will not beg for something he already knows he brings immense value to. That's not arrogance. That's self-respect. Do you see what I'm saying? Men must stop seeking healing from women to fix what's broken inside them. That is not her responsibility. That is yours. And it begins not by running, but by stopping. By standing still in the chaos of rejection. By facing the silent terror of being ignored. And asking yourself the hardest question of all. Am I enough even without her validation? Because if your answer is no, then you are not yet ready to be with anyone. Not yet. And here's the deepest irony. The man who doesn't chase becomes the man who is chased. Why? Because his presence carries inner value. And when he's absent, he leaves behind mystery and depth because he's already full. He doesn't need anyone to complete him. He is whole. And that wholeness is magnetic. It's primal. It's what women instinctively respect. Not neediness. Not pursuit. Not desperation disguised as romance. So stop chasing. Not because it's a trick to win her back, but because you have far more worthy things to chase. Purpose. Discipline. Becoming the kind of man who never begs for love, he commands it, simply by being. And if she walks away, let her. Because the man who can stand still in the face of rejection is the one she will never forget. Why is it that when a man stops trying, he suddenly becomes desirable? Let me tell you something hard to swallow. Chasing is not romantic. It is desperate. And desperation at its core is repulsive. Why? Because it reveals a harsh truth. A hollow self looking to build its scaffolding through another person. You don't pursue her because you love her. You pursue her because you've abandoned yourself. And that is the real tragedy. So, what is this modern fairy tale we keep believing in? That's exactly where we'll continue in the next part. Previously, we uncovered a hard truth. Chasing often stems from self-abandonment, not love. And now, we confront one of the most dangerous myths that modern men are taught to believe. That to love someone means to prove it through relentless pursuit. But love without boundaries, that's not noble, it's pathological. It's not devotion, it's addiction, cleverly disguised as romance. And men fall into that trap again and again because no one ever told them the truth. Healthy love is not a performance. It's not about throwing yourself at someone's feet. It's not about constantly proving you're worthy. It's about standing still with dignity. And yes, standing still often requires far more courage than the act of chasing ever will. Now listen closely, really listen. A man who truly knows his value doesn't chase. Why? Because he understands a critical principle. You can't inspire attraction through submission. Attraction isn't born from you shrinking yourself. It's born from sovereignty, your command over yourself. But the moment you abandon that inner command in a desperate attempt to gain favor, when you twist and reshape yourself into what you think she'll love, you lose the very thing that made you magnetic in the first place, your authentic self. She didn't leave because you weren't enough. She left because you stopped being you. Do you see the tragedy in that? So many relationships that begin in pursuit end in contempt. Why? Because from day one, the dynamic was off balance. One person constantly chasing, the other constantly pulling away. That's not love. That's a trap. A slow burn that leads to bitterness in both sides. Eventually, she begins to doubt your confidence. And you begin to resent her for needing her so badly. It becomes a silent psychological corrosion. And like rust eating through steel, it always ends the same way, collapse. But now, let's look at a powerful contrast. The man who refuses to chasse not because he doesn't care, but because he's grounded in himself, he does something extraordinary. He doesn't create distance. He creates space. And in that space, something real can unfold. Respect, curiosity, desire. Because he's not forcing connection. He's allowing it to emerge naturally. And that's the only kind of connection worth building, one rooted not in dependence, but in mutual recognition of value. Now, you might be thinking, but what if I lose her? Good. Because if your absence doesn't matter to her, then your presence never truly did. If her affection depends on you constantly proving, performing, and pleasing, then the truth is you already lost her. You just haven't admitted it yet. So stop auditioning. You are not trying out for the role of man in her life, be it in your own. The world is overflowing with exhausted men. Men who have burned themselves out trying to hold on to someone who was never looking for a partner, only a fan. But you were not born to be liked. You were born to be respected. And you earn that not through pursuit, not through appeasement, but through purpose, through mission. By being the kind of man who can walk away from anyone and still remain whole. So what does wholeness really look like, and how do you cultivate that inner strength without losing your softness? That's exactly where we're headed next. Previously, we revealed a painful truth. When a man abandons his sense of self to hold on to someone else, he guarantees not love, but loss. Now, we go deeper into what makes that shift so terrifying and why it's exactly what must happen. It's terrifying, isn't it? And it should be. Because this path asks for everything you've spent years avoiding. Facing your loneliness. Confronting your emotional dependency. Rebuilding your self-image from the ground up, brick by brick, belief by belief. But here's the reward if you're brave enough to stop running. When you finally stop chasing, you stop bleeding. You stop sacrificing your soul under the illusion of love. You stop betraying yourself in exchange for crumbs of affection. And the moment you stop betraying yourself, you begin to become dangerously powerful. Not because you've learned to manipulate others, but because you've stopped manipulating yourself. Here's the unfiltered truth, and it's not gentle. If she pulls away, let her. If she tests your boundaries, stand firm. And if she walks away, watch her go. Because the man who can remain still without flinching is the man she never forgets. But here's the tragedy I've seen again and again. Why do so many men lose themselves the moment they feel affection? It's one of the most brutal patterns I encounter, and more common than most men are willing to admit. A man meets a woman. Suddenly, he feels alive again, really alive for the first time in years. He sees possibility. He feels seen. But instead of calmly standing in that truth and letting the connection evolve naturally, he panics. He clings. He folds himself into a shape he thinks she wants. He becomes reactive, desperate to hold on to what he just found. And right in that moment, begins to vanish. Here's the harsh reality. The second you abandon your principles just to secure someone's presence, you've already ensured their eventual absence. That's not love. That's self-erasure. A masculine man doesn't shrink to earn affection. He doesn't compromise his essence. Instead, he deepens it. He sharpens it. He becomes more of himself, not less. But men without structure, men without purpose, they turn relationships into their identity. They convince themselves that love will somehow fix the aching hole in their soul. But true love can only thrive when two whole people come together, not when one dissolves into the other. So, what happens when you make a woman your entire meaning? You place her on a throne, and for a moment, it may feel romantic. But in truth, it's not love you're offering, it's worship. And worship is not intimacy. It's suffocation. No woman wants to be the sole source of a man's self-worth. Because that's not attraction. That's pressure. And over time, it will rot the relationship from the inside out. You think she'll love you more for being available 24/7? for saying yes to everything, for abandoning your values just to avoid confrontation. She won't. Instead, she'll begin to question your backbone. She'll sense the emptiness hiding behind your constant agreeableness. And eventually, she'll feel something far worse than frustration. Something she may not even be able to name. And that silent shift, that quiet disconnection, is exactly what we'll uncover next. In the last part, we uncovered how overpleasing leads not to love, but to quiet rejection. That slow, subtle disconnection begins not with a fight, but with something far more painful, revulsion. Because deep down, she senses the truth. You're not showing up as a grounded, sovereign man. You're showing up as a mirror reflecting her moods, her preferences, her emotional weather. And that's not strength. That's fear dressed in a smile. Now contrast that with a different kind of man. A man who's built something inside himself. An identity forged in discipline. A purpose rooted in truth. When he enters a relationship, he's not looking for someone to rescue him. He's not outsourcing his emotional security. He's bringing something real to the table, something not dependent on her approval. And do you know what happens then? She respects him. She leans into him, not because he chased her, but because he didn't need to. He invited her into a life that was already meaningful, already full. He didn't beg her to join him. He welcomed her into a reality already worth living. Now, let's get brutally honest. Some of you reading this have never tasted that kind of inner power. You've spent your entire life trying to please everyone, believing that's what good men are supposed to do. And sure, kindness matters. Compassion matters. But not when it's disconnected from strength. Not when it's just a mask for your inability to say no. Because that no, that boundary, that refusal to betray your soul just to make someone else feel more comfortable, that's where your masculine edge is born. And you need that edge, not to dominate, but to protect. To protect your values, to protect your mission, to protect the integrity of the relationship itself. Because let's be clear, a relationship that demands your self-betrayal in order to survive isn't a relationship. It's a slow, quiet, spiritual death. So stop asking, what does she want from me? And start asking, what does the truth require of me? Then live by that truth. Speak it. Stand in it. Even if it shakes the room. Because the right woman, the one truly meant for you, she won't run from your fire. She'll respect it. And if she doesn't, let her walk. Because the man who refuses to dim his light for approval is the only kind of man who will ever find real love. But here's the tragedy. Why do so many men still believe that if they just love hard enough, sacrifice deep enough, stay endlessly available, then somehow, eventually, they'll earn the respect they long for? It's heartbreaking. And it's a trap. One of the most self-destructive lies a man can ever believe. Because here's the truth. Chasing respect never earns it, especially in relationships. The more you chase, the more invisible you become. And the worst part, you don't even realize it's happening until you're already gone. And this disappearing act, this erosion of masculine essence, how did it begin? And why are modern men being taught to suppress their strength? That's exactly what we'll unpack next. Previously, we explored a painful paradox. When a man dims his light to be accepted, he doesn't become more loved, he becomes forgotten. And in that loss, he forgets himself. Now, we step into the deeper truth about strength, what it truly is and what it is not. We've been told that masculine strength is cruel, that it's rooted in control, in dominance, that it's inherently dangerous or abusive. But let's make a vital distinction. Strength without discipline is toxic. Power without purpose is dangerous. But that's not what we're talking about here. What we're speaking of is something deeper, something sacred. Moral sovereignty. The quiet, immovable presence of a man who does not flinch, who does not bend the knee to emotional chaos, who refuses to be swayed by manipulation, even if it's wrapped in affection. This is the kind of strength that doesn't shout but is impossible to ignore. And what happens when a man ignores this truth? When he suppresses his instincts? When he abandons his mission, tones down his voice, shrinks his identity, all to keep a woman from leaving? He is no longer a man in a relationship. He becomes a hostage within one. And here's the hard twist. She will resent him for it. Not because she's cruel, but because without ever asking, he silently places the burden of leadership on her shoulders, while he withers away into passive silence. Is that love? Number. It's a betrayal of her and of himself. This is why truly masculine men disappear when they are no longer respected. Not out of bitterness, not as a strategy, but because they understand one thing with absolute clarity. Staying in a space where you're being slowly dismantled is a violation of your psychological integrity. He doesn't threaten to leave. He doesn't make scenes. He simply knows that real power lies not in shouting, but in walking. In his willingness to withdraw his energy, his focus, and his presence from any space that refuses to honor them. And let's be very clear. That kind of departure, it's not silence. It's a roar. It says, I will not be twisted into something I am not. It declares, I choose growth over comfort, purpose over approval. That kind of man is dangerous, but not to women. He's dangerous to illusion, to dysfunction, to any dynamic that demands the death of his soul in exchange for proximity. Now compare that to the man who stays. The man who stays too long, who stays too silent, who stays too agreeable. What becomes of him? He decays. He simmers with resentment. He explodes at the wrong time, in the wrong way. Or worse, she simply fades into numbness. And she feels it. She sees it. She's no longer standing beside a man. She's standing beside a shell. And the damage? It doesn't stop there. It becomes generational. Sons observe. Daughters absorb. Patterns repeat. And silently, unconsciously, the cycle continues. So let me ask you something difficult. When was the last time you walked away from something that dishonored you? Not in rage, not in dramatic protest, but in calm, steady clarity? When was the last time your silence said more than 1,000 arguments ever could? Because here's what you need to understand. Masculine men don't chase. They lead. But what does true leadership look like in love, in presence, in purpose, and how can you live it every day? That's what we'll explore in the final chapter. Previously, we saw that when a man's leadership is no longer welcomed, he must walk away not in anger but in clarity, because no man can build something meaningful while being seen as a servant. Now we turn inward, toward one of the most dangerous lies we've been sold, that love should feel easy. But ask yourself, where did that belief come from? Why do we think real love should be effortless? That it should just flow, be natural, gentle, like breathing? What a naive and dangerously seductive illusion. Because real love, the kind that is structured, sacrificial, sustaining, isn't effortless. It's brutal. It exposes every weakness you hide. It slices you open not to harm, but to heal. and it demands that you evolve into someone far greater than who you are right now. You want to know why your relationships fall apart? Why they leave you bitter, confused, and hollow? It's not because love is broken. It's because you haven't yet become someone who can carry the weight of something real. You're still clinging to the fantasy, wanting passion without pain, depth without duty, intimacy without transformation. But here's the truth. Most people never want to admit. Immature people destroy good relationships. Not because they're cruel. Not because they're bad, but because they simply don't know how to carry love without dropping it. They don't know how to stay when it's hard. They don't know how to be fully seen and still show up. They fear being vulnerable. So they run. Or worse, they stay, but they stay shallow. They play it safe. They withhold truth. They keep secrets. They manipulate. They self-protect. And then they wonder why the connection starts to fade, why the fire quietly dies. Weak relationships are psychological prisons. They're built on small lies. The lie of, I'm fine, when you're breaking inside. The lie of, this doesn't bother me, when it's tearing you apart. The lie of pretending to be committed, when really you're just one argument away from walking out the door. You don't show up as yourself. You show up as the version of you that you think your partner can tolerate. Not the raw, honest, flawed you, but the acceptable, pleasing, non-threatening version. And that is how love dies. Not with a bang, not with betrayal, but through quiet compromise over and over again, until one day you no longer recognize the reflections staring back at you. Now flip the script. What if you had the courage to be fully known? Not perfect, not invincible, just honest. What if you stopped hiding your flaws and instead used them as fuel for growth? What if you sat across from your partner and said, this is who I am. Here's where I bleed. But I will not lie. I will not manipulate. And I will not betray myself just to keep you comfortable. That kind of truth is terrifying. But it's also where the real relationship begins. Because real intimacy doesn't come from safety. It comes from bravery. From standing emotionally naked and saying, I'm not here to play games. I'm here to build something that can survive fire. You know what that requires? Not chemistry. Not feelings. Not poetic texts or perfect timing. It requires discipline. The discipline to show up when it's inconvenient. The discipline to speak when it's uncomfortable. The discipline to own your shadows instead of blaming your partner for them. And when two people commit to that daily grind, to look in the mirror together, to grow even when it hurts. You get something rare, something sacred. You build a bond that doesn't fracture under pressure. You create a love that matures, that endures, that lasts. So let me ask you, are you building a relationship or just dressing up in someone's loneliness? Are you showing up as a warrior or are you fading into a ghost? Because if you're not growing together, you're rotting apart. And that's not love. That's slow motion self-destruction. You don't get the reward of deep connection without the pain of deep excavation. And if that scares you, good. That means you're finally waking up. Because love was never meant to be easy. It was meant to make you better. But what happens when you finally rise into that version of yourself? Steadfast, grounded, unshakable. How do you walk into love as a complete man and not a half-built shadow? That's what we'll explore in the final reflection,